Hi, thank you for joining me tonight. I'm still getting used to this Facebook Live. I think that I am live, maybe. Today, there we go. There we go. Hello, my name is Laura Kane, and I am an integrative psychiatric provider and life coach. I had done a free meditation class in July, and I had mentioned the feelings wheel, so we at Torch thought it might be very helpful if I was to explain kind of what the feelings wheel is, because it's a very useful tool to help all of us kind of reduce our stress and our anxiety. A lot of us are kind of have been programmed to deny or repress or suppress our emotions. And so the feelings wheel is a really great tool to help you get to know yourself better, get to be able to communicate more effectively, and actually start learning how to act in your life versus react. So when we're repressing our emotions or we're not paying attention to our emotions, we increase the internal angst and pressure inside of us, and then we go on automatic pilot. And when we're on automatic pilot, we're not consciously creating or consciously intending our lives. We're just basically doing what we had done in the past or what had been taught to us in the past. So the feelings wheel can kind of help you start to break out of that and kind of shift into a new pattern of being. So I just wanted to talk briefly about emotions. What are emotions? And emotions are where our internal life and our external life interfaces. So it's that place in between these two realities, internal and external. And our emotions are information as well as their energy and motion. So something happens in the outside world, and the information that we're observing or experiencing in the outside world comes into our system. Comes into our system with, I just want to say hello, Amber. Thank you for joining me. So talking about feelings, when we have emotions, we have an experience, and the nervous system, so our touch and our smell and our eyes, experiences or witnesses something, and this information comes up into our middle brain. And when it hits our middle brain has certain kind of criteria on how to identify that sensory information. So for instance, if we feel intense heat, the emotion most likely would come up fear, because that's a pretty basic safety issue, and we would pull away or retract, and actually our body would even respond before our mind fully registers what's going on. So emotions are very helpful in giving us information and letting us know what we are perceiving as well as how we perceive it. So three people could witness the same exact situation and yet have completely different emotions about it. So that's where our story kind of overlays the objective nature of our sensory perception. Although I would probably argue that our sensory perception is not objective. It's pretty subjective too. And so scientists have been trying to figure out emotions, for eons. And every culture kind of has its own way of defining emotions, its own way of experiencing emotions. I was doing a little bit of research on emotions, and I found it very interesting to think about Eastern and Western. So when we're talking about Westerners, we're talking about kind of North American, maybe even European. And then when we're talking about Eastern, we're talking about more like the Asian cultures, Japan, China, Korea, Vietnam, all of those kind of cultures. And especially China. So it's so easy with the United States and China when we're talking about, or even Japanese. Americans are raised to value individualism. And so we're raised to value individualism as well as to value high arousal emotional states. So that's why we kind of get labeled, loudmouth Americans. Like, we kind of want to be in this high level of arousal, and we also want to be happy. Like, it's the American dream, right? But when you talk about Eastern cultures, they're actually brought up to consider the community before the individual. And they're also brought up to kind of crave low arousal states. So they tend to kind of go into these more passive emotional states, and they like to be in those, versus Americans, we kind of are on the edge, and we're kind of like going from one intense emotion to the next. And so I thought that was very interesting in thinking about emotions and how we perceive emotions. But scientists have figured out that there's about 6 to 8 emotions that you find across the board in every culture. And there are multiple kind of varieties of that. But they come in, it's like disgust and sadness, anger, happiness, joy, and surprise are pretty much the 6 common ones. Although the feeling wheel that we have, that if people emailed us, we sent you a feeling wheel, they're not exactly the same, but it's kind of the same flavor. And the point is that all human beings experience each of those emotions on some level. So, why are emotions important? One, they're giving us information, like I had said. They are also they're giving us information on what's happening around us, and so the most primitive emotions that we have are around safety and danger. Which, thank you. I'm glad that I have that. The bear is chasing me. I feel fear, and I get out of the way. But then it gets really complicated, and so we can have really complicated emotions like shame or guilt, betrayed. So these are like human emotions. They're not emotions that animals will feel, whereas animals will feel pretty much fear, you could sadness, you could even say anger. But emotions go even further because their energy and motion, they arise in that interface that I was talking about. So the external environment and the internal environment, they meet, and then the emotion arises in the center. But a lot of us were not taught how to name our emotions or how to allow ourselves to feel. A lot of times well-meaning parents say, it's okay, don't cry. Whereas it might have been a little bit better to say, what are you feeling right now? And that's a normal thing to feel. And this is what I do when I feel sad, or this is what I do when I feel hurt, or whatever it is. But we're not really taught how to manage our emotions. And that leads to us repressing them or ignoring them or denying them, whatever word you want to use. A lot of us, one, can't identify what we're feeling. So, how are you? Fine. Fine is not an emotion. And two, if you were to probe a little further, now how are you really feeling? A lot of us will be like, I don't know. I don't know. Or I feel numb, or I don't feel anything, or, whichever way that conversation is going to go. So we're not taught to identify, and then we're not taught to, process. What do we do with these emotions once we identify them? So I'm feeling sad. What do I do with that? So it's kind of a double hitter as far as our inability to manage our emotions. And that comes at a really big cost because we move to numb ourselves. Because this is energy, right? So these emotions are energy. And so if we're denying or repressing them, that energy kind of builds up. And then we'll experience anger or anxiety or avoidance. Those are kind of, so the fight or flight, because as that energy increases, we kind of get this level of, there's something in there, but I don't know what to do about it. And so then a lot of us will turn to food, alcohol, television, shopping. I've been known to do retail therapy, thinking it was effective. It's not effective. It's not. There's all kinds of sex, reading. Actually, some people can just try to avoid their feelings of reading, and then drugs and alcohol, caffeine and nicotine. Those are potent. They anesthetize our emotions. Very strong at doing that. Sugar, although that kind of goes into the food as well. So emotions are so important. Learning how to name your emotions and then being able to create a mindful space to allow them to move through you is so important, because one, it will reduce stress. It will enhance your communication skills and your knowledge of yourself. It will improve your relationships. It will help you create healthier boundaries in your relationships. And it will also help you have a better understanding of how you move through the world. So, meaning you may be working at a job that you just really hate, but if you've been numbing yourself out and if you've been ignoring those feelings, it might be, your life might significantly change if you were able to get a different job, or to leave a relationship, or to move towards a different relationship. Meaning you may have a group of friends, and a few of those friends, when you're around them, you don't really feel very good, but then when you're around other friends, you feel really good. And so being able to understand that difference and then move towards what feels good. We always want to be moving towards what feels good. There's always going to be pain. I was just working on some of my posts for August and thinking about, no pain, no growth, no challenge, no growth. If we're not pushed into our discomfort, we're not really going to grow. So there's always going to be that. But, we want to kind of take all the things in our lives that we can choose or control and start shifting towards moving into an understanding that makes me feel better, this makes me feel worse, so I'm going to stop as much as I can. Sometimes family is the hot topic. Sometimes we can't really completely ignore our families or avoid our families, but we go in there and we limit our time, or we give ourselves a self-pep talk, or we will agree to do something that makes us feel good after family time. And there's all kinds of coping skills that you can use, but until you know what you're feeling, and then until you understand kind of the dynamics of the interface between your internal life and your external life, you're paralyzed. There's no ability for you to take control of your life because it's all nebulous, and you're numb. Or you're way 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 anxiety, or you're walking around angry, or you're imbalanced. There's an imbalance, right? And so all of this mindfulness, all of the things that I am putting out there on Facebook, and actually my entire practice, is about helping people find balance. And so the more we can befriend our emotions, the more information we can gather about ourselves, about our beliefs, about how our external environment affects us, how our internal beliefs affects us, and then we can start making better choices to create more balance in our lives. So we have the feelings wheel. So like I said, you ask people how they feel, and it happens to me, how are you feeling? I'm like, I don't really know, overwhelmed. It's kind of a feeling, but not really a feeling. Numb, it's not really a feeling, obviously. So the feelings wheel is a really helpful tool. So I had pulled it up. This is it. If you didn't receive one, just email torchwellness@gmail.com and we will be more than glad to send you one. This is such a helpful tool. So for those of you who have your feelings wheel, and I don't know if you guys can see, so in the center are kind of the 6 primary emotions. Although these, like I said, are a little bit different than what the research had shown were the universal emotions. So this one has mad, sad, scared, joyful, powerful, and peaceful. And the idea of the feelings wheel is when something happens, there are a few ideas. But one, when something happens, because as I had said, we're not really taught to identify our feelings, um, we actually have a many emotions that come up around most situations. So we could be experiencing 5 to 10 emotions at one time. And then throughout the day, you could experience half this wheel. So I don't know if you guys can have seen, but there's other. So you have the 6 primary, and then there's a bunch of other emotions that feed into these primary ones, and they're all kind of linked. So we have sad, and then for sad it has guilty, ashamed, depressed, lonely, bored, sleepy, apathetic, inferior, inadequate, miserable, stupid, and bashful. And there's other feelings wheels too, and they kind of have a little bit of different flavor. But the idea is when something happens, you can pull out this feelings wheel and look at it. And it's really remarkable, actually, I have to say, because I'll pull it out sometimes and I'll be like, well, I feel lonely and I feel sad. And they'll be like, oh, but wait a minute. I feel amused or I feel apathetic or like, and I end up having 5 to 10 emotions to describe how I'm feeling at that moment. One of the amazing things about that is most of us get hyper focused on 1 or 2 or 3 emotional states. So I might have mentioned the Enneagram before in some of my other talks, but on the Enneagram, I'm a 4, which is the romantic, and we get hyper focused on sadness. So that's kind of the lens that when I'm stressed out or when I go through difficult situations, I'll collapse into sadness. But the reality is there's so many probably other emotions that are coming up for me. So hyper focusing on this one is not really very helpful to me. But if I can take a step back and I can look at the feelings wheel, I actually may even notice that there was 1 or 2 positive emotions in that experience. I could have I felt sad but respected, or I felt, oh, that's a good one, aware, which aware goes into joyful. So if I'm feeling sad, I'm also feeling aware that I'm feeling sad, and that's joyful. So the feelings wheel helps you start to identify kind of what you're feeling, and then you can share that with your partner, your friends. It helps you cultivate self-awareness. But what it also does is you can kind of get the predominant feeling, which, like I said, most likely for me is going to be sadness. But then you can start collecting coping mechanisms to deal with what the primary emotion is. And it is much easier to have coping mechanisms, a plan of action, awareness of what to do with these 6 emotions versus, and actually it's pretty remarkable, thousands. I mean, there's just thousands of descriptions of human emotions. But we can just boil it down to just 6. And that really empowers us to self-care, to take care of ourselves. And then to see how things are kind of connected and how they show up. So let's see. And then, oh yeah, the most important. So when we're using mindfulness in the feelings wheel, what I would recommend is that you can take a few moments. Like I have some clients who have, there's an app that will have a mindfulness chime that will randomly chime throughout the day. So every time the chime goes off, you sit down and say, how am I feeling? And then you pull out the feelings wheel, and you can look at the feelings wheel. But at the same time, you relax your body. So we've been doing this. So you breathe, you sit down, you breathe, and you relax, you stretch if you need to. And then you ask yourself, what am I feeling? You look at the wheel, and then you can kind of pull out the different feelings that you're feeling, and maybe notice the resistance that you have to acknowledging those feelings. Breathe through it, and just invite those feelings in. You may notice the judgment that you have in reference to those feelings. You can acknowledge the judgment, continue breathing, and invite those feelings in. You may feel guilty about your feelings. You may feel shame about whatever comes up. This is the beauty of mindfulness, right? You just keep breathing and naming and practice non-judgment. Oh, look at how ashamed I am that I feel jealous. Isn't that interesting? I'm going to keep breathing. I'm going to allow this emotion of jealousy to arise into my awareness. And what you'll notice is as you can back away from judgment and as you can invite these feelings into your being, you'll notice that they start to dissolve and morph and change. It's really fascinating. It's a really lovely exercise, actually, I have to say. And I use the analogy a lot with clients about like emotions are the wind and you are the grass. And so the emotions come through, right? But most of us don't know what to do with our emotions, or we resist or we deny. So the wind comes and it flattens us, right? And so the wind's gone, the emotion's gone, but we're still flattened. We can't function the way that we were because we were overwhelmed by those emotions. But when we're healthy, the wind comes through. It will flutter, right? You'll feel sadness or grief or joy or happiness, but then the emotions pass and you're still standing in the sun, functioning fully. Another analogy is emotions are the clouds and you're the sky. But we're not taught that. So many of us just get flattened or adamantly refuse to experience our emotions. We're so terrified of them. But they will make our lives so much richer when we can learn how to befriend them, we can learn how to dance with them, and we can learn how to consciously invite them in. Rumi has a lovely poem called The Guest House. I would recommend everyone look it up. But he was like, stand at the door, invite everyone in, even if, it's pain and if it's going to rid your house of all of its furniture, know that it's clearing you out for what's new and what's next to come. So the feelings wheel is a lovely tool. I have couples that use it. It can be very effective in couple communication. It also can be very effective with children. And there actually is a children's feelings wheel, and it just has faces and colors and shapes. There's different ones, but everyone can recognize facial expressions, and kids are really good at that. And so when kids are going through a hard time, you can pull out the children's feelings wheel and kind of talk to them about what they're feeling. And so all ages, it will only help. And in the end, it's going to reduce that tension inside of us. We all are kind of walking around, most of us are walking around feeling this tension inside of us because we're just not allowing energy to just move through us. And so by identifying, welcoming these feelings in, and then knowing you don't have to do anything. And if you're feeling angry, maybe going for a walk would be very helpful. Or if you're feeling sad, maybe reaching out to someone who loves you. Or if you're feeling happy, maybe writing a letter to somebody or painting a love rock and sending it. All of these things, it helps us become conscious creators versus being reactors in our lives. So many of us are just an automatic pilot, numbing ourselves, with drugs, alcohol, retail therapy. And so this is just another tool to put in your toolbox to help you wake up to your life so that you can be fully present. And I'm not going to say it's going to be all good. Life is painful at times and life is wonderful at times, but we can live in the duality. And so that's what this tool is meant to do, is to help us be present, to help us self-care, to have self-compassion, but also to be able to kind of hold the duality of life, with both and. So I want to say thank you very much, everyone, for joining me. And please join me for my August meditation, which I do believe is the 11th. But let me look at my handy dandy paper calendar. Yeah, it's Tuesday the 11th. And I'll be doing a meditation on the feelings. So you'll learn a few more kind of skills to help you open up your heart and open up your being to your feelings, and then kind of learning how to negotiate those. So if you have any questions, please reach out to me, torchwellness@gmail.com. If you'd like a feelings wheel, we will be more than glad to send you one. Just let us know. And if you are interested in joining my newsletter email list, please email us and we will be more than glad to put you on the newsletter, and you'll get some newsletter once a month. You might get an email or two on top of that, but we send out recipes and we have little articles, and it will have upcoming events, so you'll know, so you'll be in the know. So thank you, have a good night, and be well.